Well, speaking about whether or not we have to pay more for tariffs in electricity sector, well, let's get some experts to give us their positions on the matter and more. Markwe?
It's definitely an interesting proposition, Chamberlain, to know if we're paying more, would we get more electricity? Especially when you think about the news that broke over the weekend that a particular area in Lagos has signed up to premium power and they're about to start getting uninterrupted power supply. Now, how that is true, I mean, we still do not know. I think we'll have to talk to Ikeja Disco to see just what is going on there. But we have with us this morning Mr. Wonode Rumundaka, who is the founder and CEO of ZKJ Energy Partners Limited. He's also the former MD and CEO of Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trade Company. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you very much.
Quite a number of stories for us to chew on. I mean, that story from Magodo in Lagos, as I did highlight earlier. We also learned during the week that the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trader has been paying quite a huge sum of money to generating companies, electricity not consumed. And here we see the federal government, talking about plans to subsidize electricity tariff when cost reflective tariffs could go up, I don't know if it's significant or not, depending on, how you're looking at it, but they're hoping to subsidize it. What are your thoughts on the number of these stories that are coming out vis-a-vis the mandate of the new minister?
Well, okay, so let's start with the first one about Magodo. It's something that I'd actually said on this program before, that the way tariff works in Nigeria does not have any service level or outcome for consumers. And that at the same time that the disco footprints are too large with different consumers, willingness to pay, ability to pay, that having one tariff for, say, Abuja Electricity Distribution Company that covers Abuja, Nasarawa, Kogi, and the rest of them, it's not optimal. So what Ikeja is doing is actually trying to break them into little tariff jurisdictions where you can have a particular level of service and then have a tariff attached to that. So that's very welcome. And you can do that and actually roll it out from the very willing areas, and then you can move across the nation. So that's very welcome. On the issue of tariffs, the new release by NERC, I think what NERC is trying to do is first to correct something that he needed to do in 2016, which is at the time that the government started subsidizing the industry through the bulk trader paying additional to generation companies, he needed to set a minimum remittance level for distribution companies, right? But he didn't do that because he did not put in place what the full cost of power distribution or generation and distribution is. So he's doing a look back and saying, well, if we go back to 2016, this is what your minimum should have been, and therefore this is what you either owe or not. But going forward, the subsidy continues for 2019 and 2020. The expectation is by 2021, we will now pay the full tariff cost. So there is still subsidy in 2019 and 2020, a little bit. But at the same time, it has also gone up. So what people were supposed to have paid by the old arrangement is gone up after this minor review. In some cases, as much as 10%, 20%, depending on the various discos.
So the different areas now, in spite of the fact that, discos are trying to break down their customer service area and reaching agreements with, depending on how customers are willing and are able to pay, there is still some subsidy, coming in from government somewhere to cover the rest of the areas not covered?
Yes, there is subsidy still coming in, and the painful thing is that you have to look actually where the subsidy is going to.
Yes.
Right? So if you go to, if you look at the customer classification, you have the residential, and then you have the commercial, and you have the industrial categories. Then under the residential, there's one you call R2 and R1. R1 is supposed to be a lifeline tariff, people who use about 4 bulbs and a fan, right? Then R2 next says it's people with 3-phase. So you go around all the huge houses with 10 air conditioners, all of them are R2 because they're just 3-phase. meters. And then the government is subsidizing those ones. Now, I think that is wrong. In places like Enugu, for instance, you have R2, 80% of the load. In Abuja, the subsidy goes to about 62% to R2 customers. And then if you look at industrials and commercials, they're not being subsidized. So for a country that is looking for job growth, manufacturing, you're subsidizing consumption at the expense of production. So it makes no sense the way the subsidy is being applied. Subsidizable load should not be more than 10% of the load, right? So your R1 and R2 should not be more than 10%.
So who's taking this decision? That's the question. How is government fashioning a policy that is looking at subsidizing consumption instead of production?
Well, I think successive administrations have erred in this, where for political reasons, they think that the populace will rise up if you raise that tariff. So they've managed to keep R2 low, but it needs to be broken into a smaller time where you have maybe the much smaller ones and then the bulk of the rest of the people. So only come in how customers are classified, and NEC should take a lead in this, working with the distribution companies, right?
You're also looking at the fact that, I mean, this one to discos is not the only subsidy that government seems to be paying. There's also the part where government is also, through MBET, you know, guaranteeing electricity supply, electricity generation, so to speak. And there's that money that MBET keeps paying to the generating companies. Isn't that also some subsidy being?
No, that is actually where the subsidy is introduced into the market, right? Because you're asking discos, like going forward, Abuja Electricity Distribution Companies is required to pay 45% of all its invoice up to the market, right? So when it does that, the bulk trader then bridges that and pays to the generation companies. Generation companies don't receive any subsidy. What they receive is full payment for the power generated, which the discos cannot pay for.
Does that create an incentive for the discos to take on more electricity? Or does it create, some people will say that, because at the slightest excuse, we know that discos shed power, they drop load.
They reject load.
Exactly, they reject load you know, now we've been in the rainy season, you know, if there is a thunderstorm, if there's anything, you know, they reject the load and electricity goes off. That doesn't stop the generating companies from generating the electricity anyway. So how do you then balance this incentive for generating companies to keep generating, but also ensuring that the discos are also taking responsibility and ensuring that, you know, they are giving the customers at every point that they need to be giving them?
Well, I think, so that comes to the federal government intervention, the one that has just been heard about, the president's deal with Siemens. It recognizes something, which is that transmission and distribution networks are bottlenecks in service delivery. So the investment needs to be made. Unfortunately, because of the financial challenges of the sector, it's difficult to see how discos are able to raise money or could have raised money the way the sector is. So with this new tariff and a clear, at least NEC is indicating how or what the minimum remittance is and what is expected, maybe we can begin to see people talking about financing network improvements, but that is key.
I'm also looking at, I don't know how to put it now, in terms of punishment, because some people have also recommended punishment for the disco, but they think that it is going to be very difficult for them to, you know, put down some service level agreements for the discos and enforce them. Why is it very difficult to enforce service level agreements, oftentimes with the discos? I
think one of the things that is not done is I think the consumers need to be carried along on this. I've always said this, that the tariff that is being issued is meaningless to the consumer. It offers the consumer no service level. So at 30 Naira, living in Kubwa, a suburb of Abuja, how many hours of electricity do you get? So with this tariff, it says this is the minimum remittance. This is what is expected TCN is going to earn. This is how much MBT is going to get. This is what the discos get, and then this is what regulator and, you know, and other service providers. How much electricity does the customer get? It's very silent on that. So it is very important that during tariff consultation, that discos and NEC come out to say that at this level of generation, at this tariff, this is what we can deliver to this area. This is the number of hours of service. And therefore, that way, it's much easier for both consumers, journalists, and people of interest to monitor what's going on. The way it's done is quite opaque, such that it becomes a trading blends between the regulator and the discos, and every day you have representatives of disco or generator, you know, campaigning their
own
case.
sides of the stories. But if you also look, I mean, you say 30 naira, you know, per maybe kilowatt hour might not mean anything to consumers, but some consumers, all they want is their prepaid meters. Even if you decide to, you know, raise it to 100 naira per kilowatt hour, what they want is that when they have electricity, they have electricity. If they do not have electricity, then you're not going to be billing them for electricity that they have not consumed. There are still issues with getting meters to all customers in Nigeria. What exactly is going on with that?
Well, you know, that's very interesting. So many people want meters so that they can pay for exactly what they consume.
Yeah.
Some, you won't believe it, the high percentage, it's a majority of meters that are out there are bypassed. Right? So, you know, people want meters, but the challenge is that if people continue to bypass meters, the incentives for distribution companies to put them are very low.
Yeah, but there are smart meters.
There are smart meters,
yes,
and there are human beings that can actually walk and go see what is happening. So I'm just saying this, that consumers have to understand that there is an obligation to not bypass meters because it hurts everyone, but at the same time, this is what the disco signed up to, that they're going to reduce the commercial and technical losses. So it's either they use smart meters, which is prohibitive though, we've said this, not everybody can afford that, or they put boots on the ground. So people who walk from houses to houses, but bypass is a big issue and it destroys the financial viability of the whole system.
That is very true, but it certainly cannot be the reason why discos have been foot dragging over giving Nigerians the meters that they actually need to give.
No, that's not enough. But there's still a regulator, and like you say, he has to find the appropriate way to met out sanctions.
Well, you've also talked about the fact that discos cannot raise the capital that they need to raise. Why? Because they have been overdrawn, especially when you look at how expensive the monies they got was to buy the discos in the very first instance. And a lot of talk has now gone on around whether we should revisit the privatization process. What are your thoughts on how discos can be recapitalized, or do you subscribe to those saying this privatization process in terms of looking at hands that were actually capable should be revisited?
No, you know, you could always revisit it, but what is the intention of the revisit? What are you looking for? What are you solving for? So I think that the very first thing is this. You need to have the environment, regulatory, and everything certain, and it has to be fair. Right? It's very difficult to raise money when you have a certain regulatory regime. So what NERC has done now is at least to put a tariff that says it's cost reflective, and this is a pathway for investments to be recovered. You put that in place, and then you give it some time to sit, and people monitor it. Then investors begin to have the new confidence. Because at the end of the day, if you talk about reprivatizing, if the current owners cannot attract new money, then there's no other new person that's going to jump into the sector. So it has to be certain for people how investment made will be recovered. So that's the first thing. I don't think that we should. But the very first thing, when you talk about recapitalization, is probably what the government is trying to do, right? So they've signed this deal with Siemens, or where it allows them to make investments in distribution. That could be a part of BP's, which is the federal government's injection of additional equity in the business, while the other investors will be required to bring up and make investment. To the extent they are unable to, the federal government could give them time, they run the asset, and if not, then he begin to dilute them or look for new investors. But then you would expect that the regulatory regime, the disco business is all certain, and people know what exactly investments need to be made and how to be recovered.
I'm looking at, you know, you as an investment investor in this entire sector. I mean, you're a player in the sector. You own a company that plays in the sector. If you take a look at the the overall Nigeria energy market, electricity more specifically, would you say it's a business that is lucrative, one that can yield returns?
Well, definitely, there is a different components of it. You have to displace one or the other, right? So there are generators that people are selling. There is diesel people market to generate power. So the question is, how do you structure the grid market to displace some of those ones? So there is a, and what people continue to say is that the grid electricity is cheaper than the self-generation. Mm-hmm. So there must be something in it, right? But I think that the issue of predictability in service, it's something that we're talking about, right? So if you can begin to work, and it would take some work, it would take diligent work to get that. You know, you have to have customer enumeration, which is a lot of work. You have to understand the customer, and then you have to find creative ways to actually look at the sector. I've said that one big market for a distribution company is too big. You have to put them in chunks of what can work in clusters. And so you ask me again, I think there's a business in the electricity industry.
So why is it so difficult then for the discos? Well, you have also talked about, you've referred to their size. Is the problem in their sizes?
I don't think it's the size. I think it's all about regulations and the market, honestly. You know, you can, you need creative people, you need people, you know, in finance and what have you, engineering, to sit down, and then the regulator will help move the market. It's been done by CBN, it's been done in so many other instances where you have a reform, but you have to have capable hands in the agencies of government, one, and then you have to have the government all pulling together. Mm-hmm. So TCN, MBET, market operator, and especially NERC, and even the ministry have to actually have an articulated plan that is very clear, and everyone is following it.
Mm. Would you say, are you optimistic with the new minister that's been put in place for power?
It's unfair to make any...
I'm just asking if you're optimistic. I mean, the first of the ministry has been broken. You don't have a super minister
so that is fine.
Power, works and housing anymore. The Ministry of Power is now separate, and he's an engineer, which is something that engineers have been clamoring for. Are you optimistic that, you know, he perhaps will be able to deliver?
Well, whenever there is a change where things seem not to have been going the right way, you have to be optimistic. We are optimists, right? So there's a new broom at the Ministry of Power. And then, of course, there are still some capable people who are in the sector. So I think that the greatest challenge is not the technical portion of the work that he needs to do. It is the leadership. It is putting all his agencies, having an articulated plan, and driving it as one. Leadership has been the biggest problem for the power sector, more than tariffs and every other thing in the last couple of years.
Oh, that's a fine place to leave it, Mr. Raymond Daka Wonode. He is a founder and CEO, ZKJ Energy Partners Limited, and former MD CEO of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trader. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Today this morning.
Thank you very much.
The program continues in a moment. Please stay with us.
All right, welcome back. Let's go through some of the emails that you've sent regarding some of the matters that we focused on here today. We're starting with that of Godfrey. Well, Godfrey actually speaking about the economy says, well, he doesn't think Nigeria is ready to grow the economy, asking questions about the president. But he then says, look, power is the next most important ministry, because if we get it right, private investors can build high-rise buildings like you have in Cairo, put lifts that will not be powered by gensets, increasing housing and driving costs of houses down. Companies like Dunlop, Michelin, and their likes can come back and reduce unemployment. Well, government has no business building houses. Rather, they should be used to build infrastructure for the power industry. The rail transport should be driven by gas and electricity to be sustainable and add value to people. We should place the right pegs in the right holes. That's from Godfrey.
Well, let's take a look at this next mail from Lukman Adam. This is what he says. It says, since most people already have BVN and did thumb printing, why repeat this at the NIMC, that's the National Identity Management, and this has to do with an issue we raised yesterday. It says, again, people need not go to NIMC to fill form. They can do this from home. They can use IT centers as we do for JAMB. This will create more jobs for the people and assist us to know our population. It will also aid planning. It's exactly 4 years and about 17 days that President Buhari made that statement asking, all the agencies to harmonize their data. So 4 years and 17 days after, so waiting for that, I guess.
All right, this one is from Kehinde Talabi. Says, once corrupt and fraudulent politicians and big men can be jailed or at least adequately punished, in addition to being shamed and prevented from holding any public or political office for life, the young ones will sit back. We're not dealing with crime at all as it is. If you do the crime, you're ready to do the time. No other way out. That's Kehinde Talabi.
And then from Dr. Ben, who writes in from Abuja, says, please, Controller General, what are you doing about availability of booklets for international passports? I applied with my family 2 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting. All right, Dr. Ben, in case you missed that part, here's what he said about it.
The challenges we have is the issue of scarcity. Whenever there's scarcity in booklet, the desire to rush over issues are there. So what we are doing is government is doing everything it can at the highest level of government to make sure we are able to produce passport in Nigeria and get it as quickly as we can.
So there you go. Your emails, comments, and questions, we appreciate all of them. So keep them coming through. Sunrise Daily Now, the email address, and you could also send in your comments. We will welcome them. Well, that is the show today. We thank you all for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain. So
I am Kayode Okikiolu.
I am Ayo Makinde. Have a good day.
And I'm Ogwogun Yusuf. Have a lovely one.
Expressed by guests on this program are those of the maker and do not reflect the views, opinions, and endorsement of Channels Television.